Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about my project or recent homework on in-store displays and how they make a significant impact on the sale of Honey Nut Cheerios. Now to kind of get into this, originally this started with the dunnhumby dataset that I downloaded from this website. If you go onto this website, you can very clearly see the data that was originally made. Oops, sorry for that. You can very clearly see where the data comes from as it's available right here through Breakfast at the Frat, which is the original name of the data set. So you can go and download, take a look at that if you're very curious. It's broken down into a number of different categories, which I will actually show you right here through the copy of dunnhumby that I made right now, or just downloaded prior to this. So as we can see, there's a multitude of different columns involving units, visits, which is further explains, households served, and a bunch of different types of numerical values that give further insight onto the sale of the product. In this case, it's specifically Honey Nut Cheerios. Now going back to the data wrangling, what we are focusing on is specifically unit sales, base price, and shelf price, and then specifically the in-store promotions and their effect on the sale of Honey Nut Cheerios. So if you want to learn more about the actual conversion process of what I did, I used an online free converter converting CSV to JSON after in this Google Colab where I went through here, converted all the data into a readable format, used a UPC value that identified with Honey Nut Cheerios, and then was able to go ahead also use a dictionary that I created, which was simply just taking the regular values that were in the table and only putting it down to store ID and address date provider code. I think that's how you say it. But with all that said and done, you can look into this a bit further because there's a bit of content to go through. And then this should be kind of like the final output of what the data set I should be using. This is how it looks in its final form, and it was originally saved to my local desktop. Now back to the specific data set. What I'm going to do is go through a multitude of different graphs, but in a relatively quick time period, so you guys don't have to stay here long. So on these first three graphs, we graph spending, which means how much did the consumers for that week spend on the product at its original price. So for example, the store could have made $1,500 that week if the price of the product was $3 for every box of Cheerios. Or they may have made only 75% of that because this week it was $2.50 a box. And so what we can see here, at least across these three different graphs, household served, visits, and units, which are all explained further in detail, is that they all follow a very similar trend, where as you can see, if we zoom in a bit here and drag this down, the play without in-store promotions, they follow a very linear path and their sales are very, very limited. However, if you do have the in-store sales promotions, you can see a very wide variance and massive increase in sales when it comes to units sold, the amount of visits, and the household served all seriously skyrocket. The blue represents the weeks where there was no in-store display, and the orange represents the weeks where there was in-store display. And you can read more about how the graphs are visualized, including the marks, which are individual dates represented as dots on a scatter plot, just because the entire data set is structured around the results on a per week basis, this definitely makes it easier. So each dot represents an individual week. And the channels that are more specific to this, if I can go into detail, the position of the dots in the graph or the common scale, and the color hue represent if the in-store advertisement was present or not. This is because we wanted to specifically compare in-store versus non-store. Such a problem would have clear identifiers of category and defined by distinct, unique colors to avoid confusion. And across all three graphs, the blue dots, as we can very clearly see, as I said before, follow linear patterns. Now to go down to my next three graphs, to make sure to wrap it up quickly, long story short, we can see very clearly there is a pattern between the closer you get to higher spending and lower units sold, the higher the price gets. And as you gradually more towards units sold and the spending of the actual units decrease, you can see it gets lighter and lighter. So this kind of implies that as time goes on, as inventory costs get higher and higher because they need to sell the product, they're most likely going to lower the price. Now, to give a little bit more insight as to what this could possibly mean, we graphed two things here of interest, which were price and base price, and we compare them both to units. We still use the same coloring scheme where we compared the in-store advertisement versus without the in-store advertisement with the exact same coloring scheme. And from what we can clearly see here is that, at least from what I have gathered, it seems that the in-store displays are used initially to get Honey Nut Cheerios off and running, as we can kind of see right here with the base price. There's lots of sales going on, a huge surge in orange, and massive sales, despite the fact that relatively in a lot of spots, with the exception of very high up here, if we zoom in, a lot of the sales, at least when it involves like lots of revenue and units sold per week, are with an in-store display. And what we can see with the price, which is different from the base price because the price fluctuates and it could be either higher or lower than the base price. We can see that there's a lot of blue right here without the in-store display, and then these small short bursts where the in-store display is used, which signifies that if they're not selling enough, they will eventually, in cases, make sure that the in-store displays are implemented so that they can get those bursts of sales, and as the price gets lower and lower, the more likely you'll see that trend continue. And thank you so much for giving me your time and attention. And if you want to know more about the data set, or how I converted everything to JSON so quickly, or how I converted the data in Python, feel free to click on the links. Thank you so much for your time.